All right, on the line with me today, Whit Batchelor from Whittier Trust you're in Newport Beach, California, which you wouldn't know from here, but somebody's got to work in the office every once in a while, right?
Yeah, a little different Newport than you're in today.
Yep, Newport Beach to Newport, Rhode Island, we're connected. And I have I have a question for you, sort of you as a senior vice president at Whittier Trust and also a client advisor. You've been racing your whole life. So I was sort of hoping you could walk me through some boat buying decision making and team planning and team management type concept with looking at both from an advisor point of view, but a guy who's been around a lot of programs. So before we get to that, but tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so grew up sailing in the Northeast, actually your neck of the woods, Dave, and obviously my whole life was around boats. My father was a sailmaker. My mom ran a sailing school, so haven't really known a whole lot else. Had a lot of different touch points with sailing over the years, from being a competitive sailor at a professional level, coaching level. I was a offshore measurer for U.S. sailing for a long time, so very familiar with offshore sailing and the nuances involved with that. For the past 15 years of my professional career, I have been a financial advisor with Whittier Trust. So I live with my family here in Newport Beach, California. Try to get out sailing as much as I possibly can, but find myself living vicariously through my clients' passions and endeavors, and sailing is certainly high on the list.
So do you actually own a boat these days, or are you lucky enough to sort of race other people's boats?
Yeah, so my wife and I have recently sort of rejuvenated our passion for smaller boat sailing, if you will. My wife sails a Lido 14, and I recently started getting more involved with the Star class, which is a boat that I have a long family legacy in, and so we've got a really nice sort of growing resurgence in our local Star fleet. So hopefully plan to spend a bit more time on the water these days.
And do you guys race in the harbor, or do the Stars go out in the ocean?
Yeah, so the stars are all ocean sailing. And we've got sort of a great little West Coast district circuit sort of that's kind of really been developed over the last 4 or 5 years. So probably, obviously there's real deep history in the Star class in Southern California. Some world champions living around town. But yeah, everywhere from basically sort of the Bay Area down to San Diego.
It's Olympic class status kind of has passed, so the boat's available, and as our crews. So who's your big crew? Or I guess in Newport Beach you don't need the big hunky guy off the side, do you?
I think you always need the big guy. You need a big combined crew weight. I'd say the crew is the hardest part about that fleet. There's just a very few limited folks that kind of fit the physical physique required to sail the Star, and it requires a significant talent set to be an effective crew on those boats. The crews on the Star are some extremely talented and technical sailors. So finding a crew is the secret sauce, I think, for being a successful Star sailor.
Most definitely. I'm sure all the crews would agree with you. No doubt. All right. So, you're a new boat owner. Let's go back to, sort of this boat buying process. As we all know, buying the boat is the easy part, as they say, but what you do with it and how you get it across the finish line is always the hardest, and most difficult thing to plan out. So talk to me a little bit about, you in your role as an advisor, some of the common practices or suggestions and tips you have for people or anybody looking to sort of either get into a new boat or maybe upgrade to a, bigger, more Grand Prix-ish type program. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, boat, as you said, boat buying is the easy part of the process. I think boats are available, although everything like everything else in the world right now, I think things are sort of flying off the shelves, which I think, in my opinion, requires a little extra due diligence on your part. Maybe you don't have the luxury of kind of circling around a boat you've been looking at for a while and, kind of kicking the tires. You might not have the luxury of time on your side if you're thinking about that. My experience has been, depending on what size and what you're looking at, inventory, could be kind of on the lower side. So you got to be a little bit more particular. But I think going into any, boat ownership, we all know is an expensive endeavor. It doesn't matter if it's a 14-foot dinghy or a 70-foot offshore boat. You really have to, it all starts with a budget. And I think the budget is driven largely by, in my opinion, your expectations of what you want to do. And what I mean by that is, be realistic about what your goals are for results. How do you want to finish? How long is it going to take you to get up to speed in your new particular class, your new particular boat? And if you don't know the right people to ask, find some of the right people to ask of sort of what's involved in terms of costs, to get you there. We can talk about a few of them here. But I think the first and foremost recommendation I would have is have someone help you develop a realistic budget. And that budget, like I said, is largely going to be driven by what your expectations are. Do you want to sail locally? Do you want to sail nationally or internationally? There's a certain amount of capital that can get you a certain degree in the fleet, certain results driven by how much you want to spend. And that may be in having the right pieces of equipment or also surrounding yourself with the right professional sailors, perhaps, or the right coaching. So I think there are a lot of elements of boat budgeting that people probably don't think about necessarily up front until they're sort of into it. So my recommendation for most folks is do your homework up front when you start to develop that budget so that you can be as informed as possible when you make a boat purchase.
In your time in this, typically who's a good person to sort of be your first point of contact for this knowledge? The yacht club bar is probably not the best place, but are there good professional boat program managers that would be out there and available, you think?
Yeah, I think it largely depends on the class that you're talking about sailing in. If you're talking about a larger offshore boat, there certainly are professional boat captains and boat program managers that you can probably get some referrals from your broker, et cetera, or your friends, and do some due diligence. I found that there's nobody friendlier than the local One Design, folks in the fleets, whether that's a higher end, semi-professional, One Design fleet or a more of an amateur program. But I think that, your best recommendation is to try to find someone that's willing to help. You just mentioned, I'm undergoing the same process for myself, kind of reinvigorating my sailing career. And I think people are always eager to provide advice. You just have to kind of sift through the noise a little bit and sort of do your homework.
Now, what are some known fixed hard costs, like insurance, storage? I mean, obviously it's going to vary no matter where you are in the country or what kind of vessel you're playing with. But how do you build those into the budgets, right from the get-go?
Yeah. So I think coming up with your hard costs, boat purchases, they always seem more enticing than they are on the surface. That price doesn't sound so bad. That sort of fits in the budget, but I'd say that initial purchase is obviously a much smaller piece of the budget. I think storage is certainly number one. I know here locally that in the water storage and out of the water storage is at a premium if you can even find it. So, prior to probably even buying a boat is finding out where you're going to keep the boat. And so, and the costs associated with that, the costs have gone up substantially. In the water storage is at a premium, dry storage is at a premium. So first and foremost, you've got your storage costs as a major entry point to buying a boat. And then I'd say on the fixed cost side, you want to make sure your boat is, you mentioned insurance, obviously making sure your asset is protected, and that could be from, storms and weather damage to, being out on the water the first couple of times and bumping into some stuff. So I think you want to make sure that you've got the adequate coverage. On the higher end, there's obviously, insurance groups that can kind of recommend, the appropriate coverage. There's some great One Design programs out there for One Design sailors that specifically work in that space for covering boats. So I'd say storage and insurance should be the first two boxes you check off your list. And then you're going to want to start taking inventory of what you have. And that's part of probably the due diligence in the purchasing program. So you figured out where you're going to keep the boat, you figure out what it's going to cost you to insure the boat. Now you got to sort of understand the boat that you're buying or the boat you think you're buying. And, that's going to come down to, what shape is the existing equipment of the boat? How's the bottom look? How do the rigs look? Does the rig look good? The foils look good. What sort of sail inventory, if any sail inventory, are you getting? Those sort of start to morph into more of the variable costs and what level you want to sort of take your program to. But I think doing right out of the gate sort of realistic assessment of what you're buying is going to kind of directionally give you an idea of what you're looking at ahead cost wise.
I'd say you're pretty lucky that you guys out there, you get to keep your boat in the water year round. So it's one less variable than we have out here on the East Coast or the Northeast of winter storage and all that kind of stuff. But so you're lucky. Congratulations on that one. Yeah. You talked a little bit about the variable cost. I mean, that's again, that's sort of the big unknown and is tied right to, again, your expectations and the level of sailing you want to do. We're talking sails, crews, pros, coaches. How do you build all that into the budget, given that they're virtually unknowns?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most flexible part of the budget, or the hardest part of the budget to nail down, right? But it could become the biggest part of the budget really quickly. And I think, by nature, sailors are competitive. We're athletes, we're competitive, we want to do well. And so I think being realistic with yourself in terms of what your budget is relative to your expectations and how you want to perform. There's no shortage of professional sailors or coaches or marine industry professionals that can help you optimize your boat, salesmen at the sail offs, So I think big question to ask yourself is, okay, where do I want to be, my first season? Where do I want to be in my second season? What does that realistically look like? And, how aggressive I want to get. When I talk to folks about that, I think that people are often misguided on the priorities of dollar spent. And what I mean is, people will, I have a saying, you jump over pennies to pick up jump over dollars to pick up pennies, and the idea being that, you can spend all the money in the world on really nice, super expensive sails. But if you don't get out there and practice and maybe work with a coach and get out there and do good tacks and jibes and get the mechanics of sailing the boat down, the boat handling, all of that money is not really worth it that you're spending on the sails. So I think creating a priority list of those variable costs based on, how you want to perform. And, I rattled off a few. I mean, sails, you can start with, basic, competitive, local fleet set of sails, or you can get multiple sets of sails for conditions and wind conditions and sea state and all of that, depending on where you're planning on sailing. There's on the coaching side, there's everything from free advice to, very expensive coaches that require a boat to get out and coach you on the water. And that level is really just dependent on, your expectations again. And a lot of it will be driven by, your current ability to perform. Is this an owner driver class? Let's assume it is for a moment. What are your realistic abilities as an owner? And that requires being a little bit truthful with yourself, because it doesn't matter if you haven't worked on your own boat handling, your own driving as an owner, you can surround yourself with all the best talent, all the best team, and you're going to be the weakest link. And so maybe the first start should be working on that.
Good point. Yeah. And as a form of measure, I'm sure you've sort of dealt with owners and boats that, they're eager to sort of get right into the optimization, and, maybe a boat captain chirping in your ear that what you got to do. But in some of your own personal experiences, have you dealt with programs that sort of go too far too soon? And are there good ways to sort of, again, plan that out as part of being realistic about where you want to go with the program?
Yeah, absolutely. I see it a lot in the offshore space, right? The scope can just get so much bigger so quickly, and the variables can get so much greater. In one designs, you're fairly limited on the variables to a degree. But yeah, and I've seen it on both sides, Dave. I've seen And I'll show you as a measure when a boat owner or captain presents a boat to get measured for their rating. Let's say they're doing Transpac or Bermuda or something like that. And I've seen both sides of it. I've seen the optimization to the max. I won't name names, but the naval architects that we all love and have friendships with, who do a great job with providing feedback on rating optimization. That can get extremely costly extremely quickly, from, hey, here's this new boat I need to get a rating. And they're like, well, you need a new mast, you need a new boom. By the way, we should do a new rudder while we're at it and fare down the bulb. Well, you've just put yourself in the yard for 12 months after you bought your new boat before you can go sailing, and spent, probably double what you paid for the boat itself. So that's one end of the spectrum, and probably not necessary until you've gone out and sailed and sort of figured out exactly what's important to you. So slowing down a little bit right out of the gates. But I'd say the flip side is true as well, Dave, which is, when I show up to measure a boat, and there's been zero prep put into it at all, and the owner's like, oh, I don't really care, just whatever I need to do to get a rating on a piece of paper. And I often respond to that situation, and I'm like, look, you're talking about, on a race like Transpac or Bermuda, you're talking about minutes or hours of corrected time, that requires very little of you, maybe a day's time in prepping the boat properly, to get those few little, advantages on the rating. And so I think there's a whole variety of advice that a potential new owner of a race program needs to get, so they don't fall in either one of those categories. They're getting the right level of optimization, so they're well prepared, and they're not. Nobody wants to finish an offshore race and say, oh gosh, we lost by 5 minutes. Where did we lose that 5 minutes? So there's a whole spectrum there that owners have to be well prepared for.
Yeah, you don't want to go 2,000-3,000 miles and think like, okay, every mile we just left a couple more seconds here, and I wish we had done that. But
yeah,
keep it real. So that said, as far as getting the boat ready, that's kind of the easy part. But then just running it. In your experience, have you dealt with teams and programs that approach this as an LLC? We hear a lot of that, where boats might be registered in different regattas as companies. Can you explain a little bit sort of the mechanics of creating a team in an LLC as a race boat?
Yeah. I think in any race boat program, you're committing significant. And this would be my recommendation as an advisor: is that you're committing significant capital to this passion that you have. But what you don't want to do is, nobody wants to leave dollars on the table. Nobody wants to put the rest of their balance sheet or assets at risk, if they aren't properly insured and hit someone out there, or someone, God forbid, someone gets hurt on the boat, and those unfortunate things happen. So I think, it's really important to run your race program, as a business asset. We know that, a race boat is a depreciating asset, not an appreciating, vintage car or something like that. But nonetheless, you should approach it from a business perspective. That would be my recommendation, even down to, I'll call it the more, smaller but more professionalized one design level. And that is, put your boat in an entity such as an LLC that's going to sort of insulate you from risk. So you can funnel cash flow needs by capitalizing that LLC, and then you can pay costs out of that entity. Chances are that you're paying, the sailing world is full of independent, contractors for every trade. Everybody that you're bringing into the program, whether it's the coach or a professional sailor, or, someone working on the boat for this or that, you've got a lot of different people coming in to work for you. And I would treat those people as, independent contractors. And that means, collecting W-9s, issuing 1099s to people at the end of the year. It protects you, and it protects them. So it's important from a tax perspective. It's important from a liability protection perspective. There are some other significant, you have to talk to your tax and legal professionals, but we all see listings, on Yachting World that say, boat owned in LLC. There's some value on the transfer side of things as well, if the boat is in an entity. So, there's very little, logistical or upfront costs. Here in California, it's $800 a year to maintain and register an LLC. It doesn't cost you anything to really some minute tax costs, maybe to issue 1099s and collect W-9s from employees. So I'd say you've got fairly de minimis cost to running a professional program like that versus the potential risk if you kind of just sort of pay everybody under the table and sort of one-off it.
Oh, those pro sailors, they love that under the table, don't they?
Yeah, everybody does. Venmo's made that really, Venmo or Zelle or whatever, we can transfer stuff all sorts of fun ways.
Interesting. So you mentioned, depreciation versus appreciation. Now, only an owner can appreciate the boat and the amount of they put into it, right? But what about the kind of the exit strategy? There is a point, right? I mean, maybe you're going to go then upgrade to a different boat or downsize, whatever it might be. How do you commonly find that, owners are able to, whatever the financial, release their assets in a good, positive way? Good ways to kind of get rid of the boat or offload it.
Yeah, I think, again, that comes down to, these aren't making money investments. These are passions, right? That people are pursuing a hobby or a passion. And so, everybody's ability to have disposable cash flow to finance their sailing operations is going to vary. So there's not a hard or fast rule. We all know that going out and building a custom, very unique, very customized race boat is probably the most costly exit endeavor. A boat's generally not an investment. So, you got to prepare for, what am I going to recoup, if anything, when I sell this boat? And that should be part of your general budgeting process when you go in. I think there are markets in one design fleets that are fairly transparent and easy to understand. So I think, the level of depreciation is fairly quantifiable when you're in a one design fleet that's sort of active and ongoing. It's like buying a new car or selling a used car. I think you kind of know what the market is, and you probably can get a sense of that. And that should just be part of your budgeting process going in. When you get into the offshore space and whether that's a 30-foot offshore or a 70-foot offshore boat or custom or more, like whether it's a Santa Cruz 50 or a sled, 70-footer, Santa Cruz 70, you've got to really sort of start thinking about, what is my plan for expensing this asset and dispositioning this asset. And, there's a whole variety. There's some really great tax advantages to donating assets that end up, having a real charitable benefit, maybe more after-tax sense to donate your old race boat to all these great organizations that we've probably worked with that are recipients, like the Coast Guard Academy or others for donated boats. So that's one. There's some advantages to leasing boats back from those organizations. The move may not be to buy the boat. The move may be to lease the boat from one of these organizations that has taken an offshore boat in donation. We've seen a lot of examples of that, and therefore capital expenses that you put into the boat up front could be charitable contributions to the organization. So there's some real tax nuance that happens when you get into the offshore space that you just don't want to go into blindly, because while we all recognize we're throwing disposable income or cash flow at this passion we have, nobody wants to leave meaningful dollars on the table.
Right. Yeah. The donation program is also, as kind of flip side, is a way to tiptoe your way actually into it.
Yeah.
Some of these programs I know through the academies are pretty top shelf, and you have, nice containers full of pretty good sales or not even used sales. Right. And it's kind of a way to get into it a little bit before you go big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, David, across a bunch of these topics that we've sort of talked about, I've been in this unique position, as a financial professional and also as a sailor myself, and in different aspects of the sport. I've had the advantage of seeing it done really, really well and really, really wrong, and there's not a right and wrong answer, but there are definitely ways to minimize your financial exposure, minimize your personal risk, and have a really good time. We want to make this, sport, accessible for those that can, access these sort of unique areas of our passion and hobby. But we also want to do it in a way that feels like it's achievable. And I think the element of doing your homework, doing the thoughtful budgeting, find someone that can help you walk through all of those mechanics. The more prepared you are going into it, the better your expectations are going to align with the outcomes of what you're trying to do.
And have fun no matter what you do, because it's supposed to be fun.
It's all
spending money is fun, right? No.
Yeah. Nobody gets angry at the end of the day on a race course,
Exactly. So, communication, though, one sort of final point is obviously very important in, how you sort of being open with both your team and, also maybe your spouse, when we go through the things, not have new sales shipped to your office versus your home. But anyway, so communication, though, is a big part of it, right?
I think absolutely. Yeah. 100% communication. Yeah. I think being realistic about, what your expectations are, whether it's communicating with your spouse, communicating with your crew, communicating with people who are cutting the checks, being honest with yourself is probably a big part of it as well. Like, a lot of this stuff is somewhat impulsive at times, and, maybe sleep on it before you make a decision would probably be a good idea as well.
All right. Did you go through the same process with your starboat, or was that an impulse buy?
I think that it's a lot of thought process goes into that. Yeah. All of these elements come to play. I think, especially the elements of we didn't really hit on it, but who your crew is going to be, right? We talked about star crews being super valuable, and hard to find. That's true with any boat, right? Whether it's a professional crew or an amateur crew, you're spending hours and hours and hours of time with these folks, and you really, really want to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with quality people that you enjoy spending time with. Excellent.
Well, I'm going to go buy a boat, I think.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd advise that or not, but happy.
So that said, maybe let's sort of wrap it up real quick with we've been talking about big boats, but I mean, when it comes down to the small boats, which is such a great way to enter the sport at an inexpensive level, there's plenty of good used small boats out there and dinghies. A lot of this does apply just right at a smaller scale, but does it change anything when the numbers become smaller?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, all the things we hit on, there's going to be maybe a little bit less formality required because they're talking about less dollars on the table. But I think the concept of creating a budget, really, in my opinion, whether you're buying a 2-person dinghy or not, there's nothing inexpensive about getting into the sport, and and we're and I would think the time element of it is true too. I've got 3 little kids, and time is harder to come by these days. And if I told my wife I was going to go spend 2 8-hour days on the golf course with my free Saturday and Sunday, when I'm not at work, that's a tricky conversation. So it's a time commitment is my point, regardless of and our time is all really valuable to us, to our work, to our families, whatever it is. So I think that's a huge element as well. But I think all the concepts apply in my opinion.
Cool. All right, great. Well, she'd probably tell you to put those, she'd ask if the golf cart had child seats or anything like that. You're taking them with you, but you can only take them on the boat. You can't take them on the golf course.
Right. Well, hey, that's before the start operation, we have a great local fleet in Newport in the Harbor 20 class. And, you bring up a good point, Dave. I have a now 9 and 7-year-old and a 2-year-old, but my older 2, I started sailing the Harbor 20 locally in Newport because it was a boat that I could bring my kids out on. And, and it was one design, which I really enjoyed. It was local. It was storage was accessible and existed. So all of those considerations definitely came into play when I was doing that, and it was an activity I could enjoy with the whole family. So
cool. Well, I'd say family planning, if it applies, is probably the first thing you do before you get the budget together anyway, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for all your advice. I appreciate it. And now I feel like I'm smarter and ready to go buy a boat and be a little more prepared for it,
Perfect. Great, Dave. Right. I appreciate it.
Well, good luck in the Star, and I guess we'll see you at the top of the results at some point, or at the Star World Championship 2023. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right expectations.
Cool. All right. Well, have a great day. We'll catch you soon.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Take care.
All right. Thanks.